Hello and welcome to the Metapod, a podcast about the Pokemon TCG that revolves around the evolving meta. And you know what? The meta is not the only thing that has evolved here in the last couple of weeks, Sean, because we have evolved. This is the first episode of the Metapod on YouTube. Sean, how does it feel to be famous now on a YouTube channel that only at this point has 320 subscribers?
At this point is the key point, though, Jake. I think this is the moment when you have weekly content that is consistent and everything takes off. I mean, you know, look at the other podcast that also has a video component to it in the Chill series pod, the Yellhorn podcast. Mm-hmm. They have a video component, and both their channels just absolutely skyrocketed. So I think that's the goal here.
I know Maddie just hit 2K, and I think Zach is like 1.92 or something like that. I saw this morning or last night. But Sean, we have a special guest today on the podcast. It's your little cat there.
Oh,
licking themselves,
taking a bath,
cleaning.
So this is also something y'all don't see when y'all are just listening, is how often the cats are usually somewhere in the background of this room, because they like coming down to the basement where it's warm and just hanging out. So
if you want to see Sean's cats, you want to see his Mew skateboard hanging on the wall, and you want to see my monstrosity of a college room, basically, go check out my YouTube Atrocious Gameplay. We'll upload. I'm not 100% sure if we'll do Tuesdays or Wednesdays. Might do Wednesday. We're recording this in the morning of Monday because I've got night class tonight for grad school, so it's a little bit different. I'm not 100% sure what we want it to be, but it'll go up every week shortly after the podcast airs, whether that's on Apple, Spotify, Google thing, whatever you like listening on.
Yeah, it should be on basically every podcasting platform, but now it's also on YouTube. So I will link. I think your channel's always been linked in the
I think so.
But if you are a video podcast lover, then that will be the place to go. Jake's YouTube channel in particular.
It'll be a way to support the podcast. But you know what else is a great way to support the podcast, Sean? 5-star reviews, or actually, just reviews in general. Because if you do not know, Sean, constructive criticism is a thing. It is a thing with reviews that are not 5-star. Let us know how we can improve. We always like trying to improve the podcast, bringing video series out to y'all. We gave a challenge, X amount of reviews, and we'll provide video episodes. And look at that. We provided video episodes now because we hit that goal. But, Sean, we can improve if you don't improve suggestions. We have officially received our first 1-star review. We are officially a real podcast now, Sean. Yeah, we've made it into the clear.
We got haters now, so we've done it. Looks like we made it. Yeah.
Shout out to the 1-star review that didn't actually leave any review. You provide no constructive criticism to society, and therefore should have kept your mouth shut. I'm just kidding. I'm not actually that mad. I actually like that we broke the barrier of not a 5-star review.
But you know what I will say? Jake? If you are a real listener who left the 1-star review and didn't say anything, we're calling you out. Tweet at us. Why do you hate us?
Yeah. Let us you hate the podcast for some odd reason.
1 star is like going out of your way to say this is particularly bad. So
if you're gonna at least blemish our perfect record, at least let us know why. At least let us know why. But, Sean, we got a lot to talk about today. We didn't even get to talk about half of the Pokemon meta last week because we were so busy with our excellent collab series with the Flow-T cast. But Battle Styles has officially come out standard. I would say there was a lot of good reception with the standard format, and we'll get to that. But first, I kind of want to talk about expanded because we didn't get to talk about it last week. And even though we haven't really had any events with Battle Styles legal in expanded, Lusamine and Wally have been unbanned. And let me tell you, it did shake up Expanded. But Sean, what do you
Pause.
want to talk about first?
We didn't read the review. We didn't read the 5-star review.
That's true. So hanging you on the edge of your seat, if you want to listen to Expanded, Sean is going to read. I got so fired up about that 1-star review, even though I promise that I'm not mad. Drinking out of my cup of sunshine, trying to. Anyway, Sean, let's read this wonderful review.
The review is from Cinder Pico. It was on March 1st. So thank you, Cinder Pico, for leaving this 5-star review. The title is just great! ! And then the review is, my brother and I, while we don't play competitively, love the game. And it's to keep updated on all the latest news. I wish you guys uploaded more often. Oh my, once a week.
Well, I wonderfully appreciate the review, but let me tell you about Pokemon TCG news. There was like almost nothing this week in terms of news, announcements, things like that. So like, if Sean and I wanted to upload and do the podcast more often, which I mean, I would love to do a podcast like every 3 days or whatever. There's just not enough topics in the Pokemon trading card game world.
They would be like 15-minute podcasts at a certain point.
Yeah, we definitely wouldn't do an hour or anything like that. We'd do like a half hour, 15 minutes, and the whole episode would just be Sean and I catching up, talking to each other, and reading our 5-star reviews. It would become a 5-star review podcast. That's really what it would become.
That
the new meta, Sean.
Are there podcasts whose sole existence is to read the 5-star reviews of their podcast? Now that's a very meta.
What? $1 million idea.
$1 million
idea coming right here. Anybody that wants to start this, feel free to take this and don't give me any royalties. A podcast that's sole topics are based on the 5-star reviews presented. So you leave a 5-star review, you put in a topic, and that entire episode, you talk about what that is. So let's say 5-star review came in. Sean and I are going to read it. The episode is based solely off of Trix cereal. Sean and I have to discuss Trix cereal for the entire episode. That is an award-winning podcast, Sean. I'm telling you, we should switch it up.
I actually will think. I think that if people want us to talk about a topic, and we can't tell you when this will be because we read the reviews in order that we get them, but if you really want us to talk about a topic, write a 5-star review about that topic, and we will discuss it as part of reading the 5-star review. Just try not to make it too time sensitive, because
don't be like, hey, how was the Sunday Open, the first Sunday Open Battle Styles tournament? Because we got a lot of 5-star reviews before number 35 5-star review, I think. Yeah. So it would be a while. So try to make it like, Jake, how do you feel about Spheal? Dang, I love Spheal, dude. So round.
So round, so squishy, much squish.
I know. But Sean, let's get into what everybody is wanting to hear. Well, maybe not everybody wants to hear about Expanded, but I think it's an important topic to discuss on because it is a valid format in Pokemon competitively, even not during the pandemic though. But we had the first tournaments of Expanded with Lusamine and Wally unbanned. So Lusamine and Wally, for those of you that don't know, a couple weeks ago got unbanned by the Pokemon Company. Banned cards, very, very powerful cards, not only when they were around in Standard, but also in Expanded. And Wally, for those of you that do not know, allows you on your first turn to evolve a Pokemon. So let's say I'm going second, I put down a Phantump. If I Wally and I've got a Trevenant in my, I think it's in your, no, is it from the deck or in your hand? I don't can't remember.
I can look it up real quick.
But either way, it allows me to evolve that same turn that I put down Phantump into Trevenant. So especially when the example that I used for Trevenant is XY Trevenant was item lock. Was it in the hand or
it's in the deck? It's even
in
more
the
broken.
deck. So that makes it even more broken is you can just grab it from in the deck. But anyways, I could get a turn 1 item lock Trevenant, especially when the turn 1 supporter rule was around, And even, going second, because that first turn supporter rule is not a thing anymore, even going second, item lock could still be like a valid strategy, especially in that. So thank you, Sean, for pulling up the card. This is another thing on YouTube. We can actually pull up and show you guys certain pages. So
That's right.
Wally from Roaring Skies. And Sean, do you want to bring up Lusamine?
Yes.
I know what Lusamine does. Lusamine allows you to grab a combination of either supporters or stadiums from the discard pile into your hand. So especially with things like Lieutenant Surge back when it was in standard, that card from Crimson Invasion could allow you to get like a Lusamine loop. I actually used it in Control when I played Pidgeotto Oranguru Control back in Team Up to Cosmic Eclipse.
Yes, it was a good card for that.
Yeah, Lusamine. I don't think Lusamine was originally played by Jesper Eriksson in the Bochum Regionals. I don't quote me on that, but I'm pretty sure Lusamine was a card that I inserted in because I was like, I really like Lusamine, and you know what? I did the best that I've ever done at a Pokemon tournament, so that card will be in my heart. But Sean, one of those two cards did really well in the first ever unbanned tournament for those two. Sean, do you want to take a gander at which card it is that I'm referring to?
I mean, it's probably the card that I said, I don't know how much this can do and expanded. Remember when they unbanned it? And I think we talked about this. I was like, I don't know, putting a supporter or a stadium back into your hand. I feel like it's Lusamine. I feel like Lusamine was the card that is causing all the problems.
For those of you that remember the standings of the Limitless Major Potown Expanded Championships, this is Major number 2, by the way. Or for those of you on YouTube that are looking at the results right now, holy stall, Sean. 4 of the top 8 spots were owned by various stall decks, whether that was Pyroar Stall, Snorlax Stall. Unfortunately, in the top 8, as you can see when you move into the top cut, all 4 of the decks matched up against each other. It was the Snorlax Stalls matched up against each other. Only one could remain. And then the Pyroar Stalls. And then they were on the same bracket as well. So... but that's just how it is. That's just how it is with seedings.
If you like Control and Stall, Expanded is your playground right now, apparently. So
it was super dominant. I mean, again, this was a very raw meta, first tournament of this archetype coming in with these new valuable cards into it. So obviously people don't exactly know what to expect. People are messing around with it. There's a lot of different ideas that you could work with, but Snorlax Stall and Pyroar Stall, kind of the two control stall type decks, they own 2 of the top 3 win percentages as well, Sean. In terms of the meta game, not only did they have a combined 32 control stall decks, I believe is what I saw, not counting things like Egro Vileplume or Trevenant Dusknoir, not considering those 2 things, but I say the top 2 of 3 because there was only one amazing rare Ho-Oh deck that happened to go 60% win percentage. I didn't count that. I considered it like at least a win share or at least a share of at least 1%.
Games, right? Like you have 60 games, like 92 or whatever games here. And yeah, lots of people playing the decks. You need a larger sample size to... Yeah,
so at least more than one person playing the deck. Snorlax Stall and Pyroar Stall took up 2 of the 3 spots. Snorlax Stall having a 59% win percentage, and then Wall Stall, which is more like Pyroar, things like that, doing 58% of the meta. So very, very good. I know a lot of people were tweeting about how, Stall was not only doing really, really well, but they didn't expect Stall to do as well as it did. And there was even Cincino Control. Again, as I mentioned, that is also part of the 32 decks. That's its own archetype, essentially. When we talk about like meta or win percentage and things like that, that's part of the 32 number of the amount of Stall control decks, but not a part of the 2 of the 3 top win percentage. But those Stall decks, Sean's, big decks on Lusamine. Lusamine was a huge factor in those decks, and
Do we want to
Grant
talk?
Manley was the one who won the event. Grant Manley, we know in Standard, has won with or not won, but has done really well in decks of recent past, like
Yeah.
Obstagoon, another kind of Wally deck. I think that was Players Cup 1 that him and Chip did really, really well. Or was it? No. That was Limitless Mage. That was like the Limitless Online qualifiers, right? The like OG4.
I'm not really sure, honestly. Like, I can't remember like what exact tournaments people did well with what decks in, but I think Grant in general.
I made a video about it. I made a video on YouTube. Come watch the YouTube. You can watch past format videos.
I do think though that Grant in general has a tendency to play stall control style decks. I think in some ways he's like, I'm making generalizations. He's kind of like an American version of Sander in that respect.
Yeah.
Like that's his stick, right? And like back when we had IRL events, he I think got, I don't know if he won a regional or if he got second at 2 different regionals with control decks. Like he came so close.
I know like before the pandemic, he was like the only player, I think it was like the only player in the 2020 season to like top
2 regionals
or like top cut at least. Like he like top cutted the most events out of anybody. And I think he even had a streak of like consecutive like regionals or ICs or whatever, or major tournaments that he top cutted. And I apologize for not knowing that information.
I mean,
fully,
no,
but
it's been a year plus now. So
yeah, but all things considered, he's a phenomenal player. And so, I mean, it takes a lot to pilot control. We look at this Snorlax list that he played, the Snorlax Stall with that Plasma Snorlax, very good with the Robo Subs, the Lilith Dolls. Playing, did he play Lusamine?
yeah, I believe he plays Lusamine here. He's got Ranger.
Yeah, 2 Lusamines in there
along
with the Stevens Resolve and things like that. The Captivating Pokepuff and Target Whistle in there. But anyway, Sean.
So
insane list.
So for people who like me are not a expanded genius, let's talk about like what this Snorlax does. And like how this stall really works, because I think different stalls work in different ways. Some it's all about like depleting all of your energy. Like I know the bird control, that's what its shtick was, right? Like crushing hammer, you recycle those, and then you Articuno, and then you basically leave them with no energy. But this one seems to be a little different. So I'm going to read this for the first time. I'm not really familiar with this Snorlax, but its ability is as long as this Pokemon is your active, your opponent's active Pokemon can't retreat. And that feels like, if I'm looking at the list now, like what are the combinations here that make it particularly disgusting, Jake?
There's a lot of different things. I mean, you talk about gusting format, you talk about Guzma, you talk about counter catcher, you're as a control deck, you're almost always going to be down on prizes every single turn. So counter catcher becomes a really good card because it's basically like a free gust. You don't always have to have Guzma. You can use Gladion, but the idea of the decks are to trap. That's a lot of the control deck's idea, is to force you to be trapped and not be able to go anywhere. And so basically you're just spending time every turn just draw passing, right? Whether that's you run out of energies, you run out of different cards to allow you to escape, whether that's switches, escape ropes, things like that. So that's the kind of concept. You've got things to be able to bring it up. I mentioned the counter catcher. I talked about the target whistle. Can you bring up the Captivating Pokepuff real quick?
Yeah.
I haven't really played expanded control because I don't. A lot of these control decks also require tropical beaches. But yeah,
this is
Captivating Pokepuff is basically like a Mawile.
Yes, that's what I was going to say. This is like worse than Mawile because it doesn't require you to play a Pokemon. And you can play any number of basic that you find there onto the bench, as opposed to just one.
Yeah, so Captivating Pokepuff, really, really powerful. Especially if your opponent is playing, like any sort of like GX deck, like Pikarom, Turbo Dark, any of these decks that just play a high amount of basics. ADP is another really good example, not really any evolutions. And every deck has to play a basic Pokemon, right? Because you need a basic
Yeah.
Pokemon to start the game. So,
And this is good because, like, you could just argue, well, my strategy then against this control deck is just to not put any other Pokemon on the bench. You can't trap something if it's my only Pokemon. But like, it's really hard to pull that off because, like, how do you constantly get rid of basics in your hand when your opponent could just play this captivating Pokepuff?
and you look at, I mean, what the deck can do. You know, we have things like Versus Seeker, we have Lusamine. There's a really good opportunity, Sean, to constantly have Gust. You know, you talk about almost infinite Guzmas.
Oh.
You talk about the 3 counter catchers. I mean, you got to win fast with this deck. And with 4 Pokédolls and 3 Robo Subs as well, there's a lot of ways for your opponent to not be able to hit anything for prizes. You know, you've got Poke Ranger in that deck to be able to find. You have things like Full Metal Wall. Full Metal Wall is really, really good from what I've been hearing. People love Lucario Melmetal in all these control decks. I've heard with Battle Styles, Togekiss is becoming a little bit popular, so I'm excited to see how it plays out. Togekiss already has been getting a little bit of popularity and expanded, way better and expanded than standard. But you've got the Girafarig from Lost Thunder to be able to put things constantly from the discard pile into the Lost Zone. So let's say to get rid of a lot of those switching effects, maybe, you know, your opponent plays Guzma. That is a switching effect that they can use. And so you want to get rid of that Guzma so then they can't ever Versus Seeker it.
Well, I mean, also, I feel like this in the mirror is really good, right?
Oh,
like,
yeah, no, Girafarig in the mirror is really, really good. In the stall mirror, from what I remember in the control, you basically want to play as little cards as possible. Because in the mirror, if you play cards, you know, and they go in your discard pile and they stay in your discard pile, they're getting in the Lost Zone. And that's basically how you get, like, milled out. You know, I would assume because of something like Team Rocket's handiwork in Expanded, you Team Rocket's handiwork and mill some cards from your opponent's deck, and then you get lost all those things. Captivating Pokepuff, I assume, is also pretty good in the mirror match because you can put down the things like Lucario Melmetal that can't move, the Zacian that can't move. You probably don't want to put down the Benelby because the Benelby can use Burrow. You don't want that to be a possibility, I feel like.
I don't know, because like Burrow discarding the top card of your opponent's deck is pretty, like, that speeds up the milling, if you will.
But also that Benelby has I think it's called a Poke Power.
Oh,
it's like an
Barrage.
Ability almost, but it
Yeah.
allows the Pokemon to attack twice in a single turn. So you could use Burrow twice, you could use Rotillery twice, you know, bringing a card from your discard pile back into your deck. Maybe they haven't gotten Girafarig yet, and there's a certain piece that they milled or you had to discard earlier that you really, really need for that mirror match. You know, you can throw that back in the deck. You know, you've got double colorless in this deck. You've got Capture Energy, I think it was, along with a Fire Energy or 2. Yeah, Fire Energy or 2.
And then one double colorless. Just one for, I guess, I don't know, Snorlax, Benelby. If there's like
there's a lot of
Wonder
different
Slab.
options that you could be able to. You could also use it really well to retreat something like Zacian, right?
Yeah.
But anyways, absolutely shook it up. We did see in the Limitless Major, Pikarom was the top archetype in terms of like itself as a deck, not combining different things in specific categories in the metagame. Pikarom having a 13 and a third % share, 44 decks of it. Didn't do as well. I mean, didn't do so hot. The top deck, as you can see on the YouTube screen, 10 and 4. So not in the top 8, not super well, but a couple in the top 20. Pikarom still a good deck as we see. So, but not doing as well as we thought. Maybe a lot of the Pikaroms weren't prepared. That's what I assume a lot of the decks, you know, whether that's Giratina, Garchomp, you know, the 35 of those or anything. A lot of those decks probably just didn't expect to see so much stall, so much control dominate the meta. So, and Giratina, Garchomp also being a really strong deck, as we know from Hunter Butler winning, I can't remember what regional it was, but Hunter Butler winning the regional with the Tina Chomp still going on, with that ability to use Roxy. Roxy's so good in this deck because your ability to just put damage counters anywhere and then basically turn 2 guarantee, or actually even turn 1. You turn 1 guarantee to hit, like, what is it, 2? How much damage does Giratina Garchomp do? Is it 2? The base is...
the base is 160 plus 80, so 240.
So 240 without anything like a choice band or the scarf that allows you 40 HP or 40 damage plus 10 HP or something like that. It's that combination. Anyways, there's a lot of damage modifiers that you can do in expanded, and 240 base on turn 1. Double Dragon Energy, pop the Coco to get that 3rd energy. Really, really good for Calamitous Slash or GG. Well, no, you can't GG end, but
no, you couldn't GG end. I mean, if you have a way to destroy a Pokemon turn 1,
double Dragon Energy. If you can get up to that point, you'd be able to GG end. But you could definitely turn 1 Calamitous Slash because, wow, that's a strong thing. But yeah. No, so one deck that I really thought would play Wally at least is Aggro, Sean, because with Aggro you have a lot of different options. You obviously use the Rallet Executor to get like either a turn 1 Vileplume from Ancient Origins, the item locking one, or you can get the turn 1 Rillaboom that we saw in Sword and Shield base to accelerate those energies. So I really thought that people would play Wally in this because it allows you to get, so like, let's say turn 1, I get a Rallet Executor, I get an Oddish, and then I also can put a Grookey down. That turn, I can Wally because I'm going to go second because I want to use Aggro's attack. I can turn 1 go second, get the Thwackey, get the Thwackey through Wally, and then I can use Aggro's attack to get my turn 1 Vileplume to item lock, and then I can use something like a Turf Field or whatever to get my Rillaboom, and boom, my next turn I automatically have Rillaboom without the use of a rare candy, or with doing a second Aggro attack to be able to build that up. Do you know what I mean, Sean?
Yeah, I know exactly what you mean. You basically, like, you can guarantee by your turn 2 to have 2 stage 2s without having to use rare candy or
having to use Aggro's attack twice.
Exactly.
So super growth.
Because, like, really the Rillaboom, if you have to super growth into a Rillaboom, you don't actually get to use the Rillaboom that turn and it could die. But if you super growth into the Vileplume, which is what you really want to do turn 1, and you can get into a Thwackey on turn 1 going second, yeah, you're absolutely, then you throw down the Rillaboom and you're ready to rock and roll.
It's a little bit a lot to ask for because you're asking a deck that doesn't play a lot of items, right? Because you're probably putting out Vileplume 9 times out of 10. The item locking one, you're probably not playing a lot of ways to be able to search Pokemon, so you're going to have to like naturally draw into it. So you're probably prioritizing a little bit Bridget allowing you to put 3 basic Pokemon down, whether they're non-GX Pokemon, or I'm sorry, non-EX Pokemon. So you can put a combination of, GX and whatnot. And you've got Tapu Lele to be able to find a supporter turn 1. So it's a lot to ask for, I will say, to be able to provide that strategy that I did. And maybe what people found out, I assume that's an idea that people tested because it sounds like a really good strategy.
Yeah.
I assume people tested that idea, but maybe they found more often than not that you can't get that combination off enough to really make it be worth it. So just naturally trying to evolve the Rillaboom, Sean.
Yeah, I guess they figure once you're item locked, it slows the game down long enough that getting the Rillaboom out for 1 extra turn, like taking an extra turn, doesn't matter. That may simply be...
I will say that Aggro has a really... It's one of the best decks, I feel like, against control in terms of a major archetype. And I think that's why Aggro did so well. Because you've got the item lock. You can't play Robo-Subs. Can't play the Captivating Pokebuff. Sorry. You're not going to knock out my Vileplume. You could trap it, but you're not going to knock it out. And then you also have the Rillaboom. So you can constantly accelerate energy, Sean. So whether you use the Team Flare Grunt, that's okay. I've got something like a Brock's Grit to be able to put my energies back. things like that. I got different switching effects like Malolana, Guzma, and I've got something like Life Forest. Well, Life Forest actually wouldn't help me at all, but Faba, 3 Fabas in the list, and then Cynthia and Caitlyn. Cynthia and Caitlyn allowing you to get back the Malolana, to get back the Guzma, and all that stuff in case, they're leading off Giraffrig and they're not using the Snorlax, because the Snorlax would be, a pretty good way to prevent the switching in terms of just making them use more energies. But Cynthia and Caitlyn allowing you to get a supporter back, whether you want to use the secondary effect of discarding draw 3 or just regularly getting back a supporter, not drawing 3 cards. Maybe you don't want to do that.
Yeah, I think that's another good point, right? Because it has the secondary of draw 3, but it's optional. So if you have Guzmas that are down, you have 3 of these in the deck that you can use throughout the game, and you just play it. Don't even get the extra draw 3 because you don't want to mill yourself, and then give me a Guzma. Okay, cool.
I will say, there was another Limitless tournament, Sean, the Limitless Weekly number 23. This didn't include battle styles, but it did evolve the meta a little bit more. Aggro ended up winning it, taking the top 2 of 3 spots. So very interesting. Again, I will say I'm looking at kind of the matchups, especially for the winner. Carlo Conti EX went 10-1 in the event. Didn't face a lot of control-y stall decks. So the metagame did provide a lot of stall, though. 23 stall decks, not including like an Aggro Vileplume. So 23, the wall stall ended up taking about 8% of the meta, and then Snorlax stall taking another 7.25 almost. So pretty great. But the aggros that did do well, they took up about 80 or 68% of the win share. Again, as I mentioned, 2 of the top 3 finishes in the final standings. So aggro looks to be pretty good, especially if you have a lot of stall. That's 2 events in a row that aggro has actually done decently well, with a small number of players playing in it. Aggro it could have gone farther, but it did meet up in the top 4. So only one of them had to go, matching up with Eternatus in the finals. I feel like Eternatus isn't a terrible matchup, to be honest, because you have that GX move, and especially preventing them from playing items. Item lock is just strong, in my opinion. There's a lot of legacy formats, and I think people probably in the late summer, early fall of last year, were playing around with the idea of banning Vileplume from Ancient Origins in their custom expanded formats. So just the ability to evolve into that stage 2 right away, and prevent items so quickly is just super strong. I feel like expanded is very item heavy, so be punished.
Now, Jake, if you were to ban an item lock, knowing that Lusamine is unbanned, do you feel like it would just become the wall stall? Meta?
It really would. I feel because then one of the best matchups against stall, you wouldn't be able to stop its main tactic of playing those items, preventing you from taking prizes, allowing you to use Versus Seekers as well if you wanted to use Versus Seekers in your control deck to get those Lusamines back and things like that. So I feel like if you tried to do it now, it definitely wouldn't work as well. I mean, I think control is already in a good position now because of Lusamine being unbanned. But again, like I mentioned at the beginning of this kind of section talking about expanded and how the format is right now, it's still early. Yeah. Sean, there's still expanded events don't happen nearly as much as standard because not as many people play them, but it's still relatively early, and it could shake up a little bit with battle styles because, Sean, we got some new cards introduced in battle styles that have been really, really cool, I would say. Would you agree?
Yeah. It seems like people are really digging battle styles. I think I've seen so many people tweeting about how I haven't had a chance to really jump in myself and play since it released officially, but people talking about how Rapid Strike and so many of these new decks, it's the most fun they've had playing the game in a very long time. Yes. And I think that's partially because it seems like battle styles, there are a few decks that are just actually like legitimately good. Some of which we expected, right? Like the actual like Urshifu decks has some viability. But I think others of which there was maybe some surprise in how good they were going to be. So, Jake, do you want to? I'll jump us back into the screen here for the Sunday Open, which was the first and largest Battle Styles legal event that we saw.
So again, this is a very raw format. You know, standard will evolve much faster and much more quickly. We can even probably talk about standard and how it's evolved next week. But this being the first major event and a pretty big one too. I think there was like, how many people were in it, Sean? Can you check that real quick? I think it was like 200. I want to say.
Well,
yeah,
actually, show all players.
More than
304. 304 players.
304 players. Now, it was a $500 Alice collectible event, so naturally with those cash prizes, there is way more participants. But still, first event of Battle Styles. It was the 1-year anniversary, I believe, as well, of the Sunday Open. So first, I just want to say shout outs to all of the people that have been able to make the Sunday Open legal. A huge part in starting the online meta that is right now. So big shout outs to all you lovely people. I know some of the people like Neil Pye listen to the show. They've tweeted at us multiple times, and I love seeing it. I love it when y'all tweet at us. But anyways, this was a really, really cool event, in my opinion. I did not personally get to play. One, because I don't have like any Battle Styles cards. But two, I also had to work on Saturday. So I was watching it while also working from home. But anyways, this was a really, really interesting thing. ADPZ, if you're watching this on YouTube, you'll see, was still the top deck. And I just want to hint right now, I'm not going to delve in too much to ADPZ, but I still think ADPZ is one of the best decks right now. I still think it's a very, very strong deck. I don't think anything really changed out of it, right? We didn't like get a fairy deck that was able to one-shot, an ADP right away.
No, I mean, look, Zacian ADP, you get your rusted swords, and then it's up to them to decide, like, how much higher do they want to raise their damage output, or do they even care? But
here's something that I feel like Rusted Sword is not as impactful as we originally thought.
I think
Rusted Sword gives you the option to be able to reach that higher damage output, but if you think about it, they really just want to gust up your bench sitters.
Yeah.
Right? Your Dedenes and your Crobats, and you still got things like Mawile. So I feel like Crushing Hammer is more relevant in Zacian ADP than like a Rusted Sword, in my opinion, because you still have these single prize attachments, with Eternatus and things like that. So like it's still, and even in like a mirror match, getting rid of that water energy, or whatever, all these Urshifu decks, you get rid of that special energy, you get rid of the one fighting energy that they want. So it could do really, really well. And I think it's still like a really good deck. You don't need to hit those high damage outputs because one, your game plan is to boss game right after you Ultra Creation GX. So ADPZ, still a good deck. Maybe not BDIF, but still relevant enough that I feel like it's very, very good. And please ban ADP. Get it out of here. But we only have a couple more months of it, Sean.
I know. We'll be mercifully rid of it soon with rotation. Fingers
crossed.
There
was a review that was like, even though Jake constantly brags on ADP, I still think this is a great podcast. And you know what? You're not wrong, I will say. I don't remember the name off the top of my head, but I read all the reviews when they come in, and that one made me laugh. But
I will say though, it seems like, so we did our collab cast last week, right? And we had the crew on. In our episode, we talked about how good Rapid Strike was. Their episode, we talked about how good Single Strike was. And I think between the recordings of those two, I at least changed my opinion. I thought, I think actually Single Strike is better. But this would suggest that no, Rapid Strike actually might be. We were correct the first time around in that Rapid Strike Urshifu is actually the better new Urshifu deck in this format. So, Jake, do you want to talk about
I stayed.
this?
I stayed on the train, the hype train of Rapid Strike Urshifu. Can you go back one, Sean?
Oh yeah, I'll go back.
Back to the full standing. So Urshifu Rapid Strike had 25 decks in it. 25 decks people entered, a 52.5% win share, going 90, 81, and 0. And then Single Strike. I do agree originally that Rapid Strike was better. It doesn't surprise me that more people played Rapid Strike than Single Strike, but still 12 people played Single Strike. I know Azul was playing with it on stream, and people were kind of struggling to, create a consistent idea of Single Strike Urshifu. So only 3.9% of the share, 31.39 overall. So not doing incredibly hot. I believe if you click on Single Strike Urshifu, I believe Shreddimer, he played Rapid Strike. My apologies. He did real well with one of the Rapid Strike decks, but Rapid Strike, there was a 10-3, so it did do very well. If we want to look at that list real quick, because we'll spend a little less time on this one, but a 4-4 line of Houndoom and Houndour, and then a 4-3 line of the Urshifu Single Strike. Again, like we talked about, that Jirachi getting rid of that psychic weakness. There's a lot of Mewtwo running around, whether that is the Pikarom Mewtwo, just a Welder Mewtwo, or we'll get into later, Victini VMAX Mewtwo. Allows you to do a lot of things. You get a lot of draw with the Tower of Darkness, allowing you to discard a Single Strike card, draw 2 cards, I believe it is. Comboing that with the Urn of Vitality, you can discard a Single Strike energy, Urn of Vitality it away, and then Houndoom that energy back onto like an Urshifu VMAX. The scroll being very, very good. And then having just the other good cards, Mew, I think, is coming back into the format with Rapid Strike Urshifu, which we'll get to here in a second. Playing a lot of boss, having some switch effects, and just bopping things for an absurd amount of damage. Also playing the Stone Energy as well. I kind of want to note that real quick. Also playing a couple Stone Energies to be able to prevent damage as well. Because with the Houndoom, you're putting energies on yourself. The Stone Energy allows you to prevent, kind of almost like negate the to negate the damage counters that you're putting onto your Urshifu, Sean. Sean, looking at this list that went 10-3, how do you like this list?
It's extremely linear. Now, look, the person went 10-3 with it, so I can't. I want to actually look at another list, the second best list from Fuji System, and just compare it. And just say, like, okay, where did they deviate, right?
It's basically, Sean, the same list, but instead of Stone Energies, they provided Capture Energies, which I don't think it made that much of a difference. I would actually look at that 10-3's matchup spread, and see what kind of matchup. Did they match up with a lot of Eternatus? Did they match up with a lot of Pikarom? But
we got
looking at
ADP,
it here,
Inteleon. Okay, I mean, this is interesting.
Not a lot. We're looking at this. Not a lot, but I will say something to note. The top 2, so face Shreddimer and Willy, both 2 opponents that did really, really well in the tournament, both playing Rapid Strike Urshifu. The Single Strike deck 2-0'd Rapid Strike. I kind of want to note that. So that might be something to look into in the future. Those 2 decks doing really, really well. But Caleb Gettimer starting off 8-1, but then kind of losing the last couple rounds with the Urshifu Rapid Strike. Urshifu Rapid Strike did really, really well, I feel like, after phase 1, Sean.
Mm-hmm.
Did really, really well after phase 1. And then kind of just fell off the map, I feel like, in phase 2 in its matchups.
Yeah, I'll go to pairings. No, that's not what I want. Let's go to standings, phase 2. Because like you said, phase 1, you had a Rapid Strike Urshifu at 9th. You had it at 11th.
You had one at 21st as well.
Exactly. So like phase 1, you see a lot of the Rapid Strike in that top 32. And in terms of Single Strike, I think it was only like 1 or something like that. 1 Single Strike in that top.
Yeah, there was only that one at 34th, the one that we were referencing earlier. So it was almost like flip-flopped when you went from phase 1 to phase 2. Phase 1, Rapid Strike did really, really well. Phase 2, it was Single Strike's turn to do really, really well, and it did really well in that aspect. And they kind of flipped. Not saying that Single Strike didn't do well the first phase because they ended up making it to phase 2. That 6-2 record, but in comparison, they kind of flipped. Can we look at the matchups honestly of the Single Strike deck? The matchups, especially when we talk about phase 2 for that first for that top deck, Sean.
Players,
because I kind of want to look and see what its matchups were.
So
had those two Rapid Strike decks did well against what I assume is like a Tempozard Blacephalon. So I'm wondering in that game if they just like bricked. I wonder if that game, their only loss ended up being the Lightning Mew 3, which I assume that Jack Moore, who was playing that deck, ended up doing a sort of method where they got rid of the Jirachi, or the Single Strike deck was not able to get Jirachi out soon enough, and they used the Mewtwo primarily to just get rid of the Urshifu and hitting it for weakness. Not 100% sure, but that's how I assume that matchup would go. But hitting an Eternatus, good matchup in my opinion. One shot Eternatus, VMAX, and then the Single Strike, let's look at the deck list of the Single Strike deck again. I don't think it played Cheryl.
Nope.
No, it didn't play Cheryl in it. So, trying to hit as fast as possible, trying to whack the Single Strike deck as fast as you can, and then, trying to just essentially go faster than the Rapid Strike deck. The Rapid Strike deck not hitting as hard, just kind of putting damage on it a little bit every time, but getting a good chunk of setup damage with the Single Strike. But the Rapid Strike, Sean, let's look at the Rapid Strike. We've found through, I believe it was, I'm not 100% sure on the interaction. I should have thought of this and looked it up, but I believe the Empoleon with Rapid Strike energy is bugged. For some people, it's not 100% method, but it is bugged for some people. I believe when you have Poleon in play, when you have the Empoleon V, the Rapid Strike energy only gives 1 energy to the Rapid Strike Pokemon it is attached to.
That's annoying.
Yeah, it's not 100% surefire method, because I believe when I was watching Azul and his play the other day, he was saying that he has not encountered that. But I did hear on Twitter some people did come to that conclusion.
Mm-hmm. But
a lot of different things, a lot of cool things going on this list, Sean. I've heard it compared to something like a Lysopod. That first attack for Urshifu VMAX, when it comes into the active.
Yeah.
When it comes from the bench to the active, doing 120 more damage. So Gale Thrust for 1 fighting energy, doing 150 damage. That's a good chunk of damage. That 2 shots, almost everything in the format, non-VMAX wise, before you get into other things. Maybe you want to put like a Vitality Band in here, or
Dojo,
whatever, the martial arts dojo as well to add modifiers. And I've talked about before how like we have so much like switching effects in the format, Sean. We have Escape Rope now, a new card that is very good in the format. We've got the regular old switches. Air balloons. Air balloons are a big thing in Rapid Strike decks right now, and I think they're going to stay. And then you have something like Bird Keeper, which hasn't really been used, but is an option to be able to switch and constantly get these short, valuable, easy attacks off.
I want to look at another Rapid Strike deck because I think there was some discussion. Let's look at the Undaunted Hounds list. About using a lot of Cheryls. Now, here it is. So this is, I think, so
Undaunted Hounds list is like Zoropod, Sean. Zoropod, Zorark with the trade ability, discard, draw 2, very, very good. Undaunted Hound, for anyone who is still listening on like Spotify and stuff, this is a Rapid Strike Cincino version. The Cincino that came in Sword and Shield with Make Do, basically trade, allowing you to discard, draw 2. This was almost the same concept, and this utilized Cheryl, allowing, because you have those small energy costs,
Yeah.
you're allowing yourself to maybe put in a Cheryl, but not really getting any
negative effects.
Yes,
Yeah,
essentially.
you don't
Really,
have any
all it
energy.
is you have to just go find another energy.
Well,
It's
yeah, I
really
mean-
what it is. And we have a very good draw support format, especially with this deck. You get like 3 Cincenos. That's 6 cards that you can see just from that alone. You're playing a couple research in there. You've got Marnies, you've got a Dedenne in this list. So a lot of ways to be able to find exactly what you need. And especially with the Karate Belt, you go down early. Now that Gale Thrust is free, you don't even have to have an energy on it, Sean.
Mm-hmm. No, I like this.
It's pretty cool.
So this was like what I was looking to see, because I heard discussion about and maybe we talked about this on the Max Floatycast podcast about like maybe there's a version of Rapid Strike that doesn't care as much about the second attack, and it's all about like just chaining 150s, maybe a couple of damage modifiers, and Cheryl. And that's exactly what this is. And I think this combination with Cinccino, it offsets the use of Cheryl, because, if you're using Cheryl, you're not drawing cards. So at least this way you're like getting into cards. You don't have to say, oh, I'm using my supporter to heal, but then I'm getting no progress into my deck.
I would be interested, especially when you talk about Urshifu's second attack, Urshifu VMAX's second attack of putting 120 everywhere. Mm-hmm. I would honestly be interested to see like a Zigzagoon and a Mimikyu from Cosmic Eclipse in this deck. The Mimikyu from Cosmic Eclipse, for those of you who don't remember or don't know, it has an ability to all GX Pokemon don't have abilities. So, especially because Mew is becoming more relevant now, because of the fear and introduction of Rapid Strike, you talk about different things like Mewtwo and things like that. Mewtwo and Mew GX, you're afraid of getting hit for weakness. You're going to be able to turn that ability off, and now, unless they Malolana or Cheryl,
or they could use their GX. There's always the GX to heal itself.
Yeah, there's always the GX, but still, it's going to be a lot harder for them to actually do stuff to you if you can get them to commit to a Mewtwo and Mew GX at any point in time. Because especially with the Jirachi GX, you really don't want them to snipe that, because they can still play something like the Naganadel as of right now to be able to hit that 170, which I believe knocks out the Jirachi. I think it's like 160 HP. But
Jirachi's being 160, and if you get some Zigzagoon pings, I think you're right though about the Mew, because like the Mew may turn off the actual 120 to the bench, but at least that will turn off the Mewtwo's. There is something interesting though, because I don't know. It is interesting. I like this list a lot. If I were to build Rapid Strike, I think I would actually start here with Undaunted Hound's list. So
I think I would too. I think it's a pretty interesting list and has a lot of value to it. But Sean, there's one card that people made noise about, but I actually think it did better than what people originally gave it for, and that is Victini VMAX.
That's right.
Victini VMAX getting second in the event. Several people played it. It was almost like a Firebox type deck. A lot of people played it as, but included Victini VMAX. A lot of them kind of like a 2-2 line of Victini VMAX, and having things like the Cramorant, the Volcanions, the Heatrans, the Reshizard. Again, allowing that toolbox deck. But I think when I was watching Celios Network play in the Sunday Open, which he did really, really well with, he went into phase 2, and I believe he was like 1 win off of Top Cut or something like that. Mm-hmm. But Celios did a very good job, and I think he put it very well. This deck with Victini VMAX doesn't need to hit Welder every single turn. We talk about with fire decks a lot of how the main problem with fire decks is just not finding Welder. You don't have something like a Tapu Lele in this format to be able to find, your supporters that you want. And so fire decks struggle when they just can't find Welder. And so Victini VMAX, because of its 2 energy cost, you just need to find energy. And we have a lot of ways to find energy with the, just the aggressive draw in the format. You've got something like Giant Hearts in the deck. You have Volcanions to be able to power up all that. You've got Fire Crystals. You had to discard early. You can get some back. Again, incredible draw with Dedenes, Crobats, things like that in the format. You've got Jirachi. Jirachi, especially with Escape Rope, I feel like Jirachi is a much better card now with Escape Ropes. You do have to be careful of the bench snipe thing with the Urshifu VMAX and stuff, but with Scoop Up Nets now and Escape Rope, I think that really does well for Jirachi. So I think maybe start seeing a little bit more Jirachi, the one from Team Up with the Stellar Wish ability that we saw for so long until a skateboard rotated from Ultra Prism. So
yeah,
I really like Victini VMAX. I think it's a really, really cool deck, Sean.
I think that this was probably the biggest surprise of the first weekend was how well Victini VMAX did. Because I think a lot of people were thinking, oh, we even said it. Victini VMAX, it's cool. 2 energy, 220 damage to a V. That's just good. And you think about, the problem you run into, though, is 310 may feel a little squishy. As crazy as that sounds. You talk
about the secondary effect, if you could call it, of that attack of Victini VMAX. It does extra damage to get to that 220 if your opponent's Pokemon is a V. So we've got things like Pikarom. We've got things like Mewtwo Mew. We've got all of ADP. We've got all these non-GX Pokemon. So a lot, especially myself, I was sitting here thinking, maybe Victini VMAX is not going to be as good because you can't force your opponent a lot of times unless you boss to actually do that. But especially with this list that we're looking at here on YouTube, that is the Firebox-esque list. I feel like this is at this point the best way to build Victini VMAX is with the Firebox type of list. And Celios, I believe, played the box type list with a Mew and Mewtwo, which I think is really, really good for the amount of Urshifus that were around. Because you have that Heatran, because you have that Reshiram Charizard, you can copy those attacks, and then you can hit for a weakness to ultimately take KOs, especially surprise KOs. You can honestly put down a Mew and Mew, discard the Heatran, welder onto that Mew and Mewtwo, and then you can go from there and Hot Burn GX, or you could Flare Strike the Reshiram Charizard. Well, you can't Flare Strike, but you could Double Blaze.
Yeah.
For just absurd amounts of damage and KO Urshifu VMAX on weakness, because they're probably, in an open list format, they'll probably play Jirachi GX because they know that you have that option. But let's say if we were in an IRL event or whatever, there's not open deck lists. You might not know that your opponent is playing that Mew and Mewtwo GX.
And to your point, right? If it's a one of, it's definitely one of those, it could go overlooked, or even if it's a one of in an open deck list format, having that one of threat to say, okay, I want you to put that 2 Prizer 160, which is basically, I want you to put your Cramorant target, my Cramorant target, right there on the bench. Just sit it down, waste a bench spot, just because you're afraid of Mewtwo and Mew.
But here's another thing. You got to waste another bench spot because Mew is becoming more prevalent in the format.
Yep.
So there's another spot. So you talk about against a Rapid Strike deck, that's 2 spots that, let's say the Cincino version, you probably want to have 2 Urshifu VMAXs, right?
Yeah.
One in the active, one on the bench, so then you can constantly Gale Thrust. You want to have at least 1 Cincino because you only play 2 or 3 research. So your draw support, you can only have 1 if you got to put the Mew and the Jirachi do not allow you to get popped. So I really think this is a really, really cool list, Sean.
Yeah, and the only thing I would also consider, and maybe it's just not good enough, but it seems like this deck may struggle with, up against Centiskorch, which also did very well this weekend, right? But ultimately, the winning list was Centiskorch, which beat a Victini VMAX. And if Centiskorch becomes a deck that it struggles against, which it may not, but maybe one of the memory capsules, so that you can use the original Victini's second attack, which is 20 times the energy on the opponent's active. That may be so niche that doesn't matter, but just a consideration. I think Mewtwo and Mew GX or memory capsule is something I would start playing around with.
I really think Memory Capsule is also a really good card. I know like tools are really tough right now because like one of the big things that I say about Tool Scrapper, it's always when you got it at the very beginning of the game, Sean, and you got to discard it because you don't want to attach it to the Crobat you started or the Dedenne or the Zigzagoon, right? So like it's very hard because you can't always control when you're going to get it because we don't have something like Adventure Bag in the format. But I agree. I think Memory Capsule with Victini VMAX is pretty good because I think Scorch is really good. But one more thing that I want to mention before we wrap up, because we basically talked about everything. Corviknight VMAX got a lot of hype. Didn't actually do so well.
Yeah,
Sean.
let's look at the...
didn't actually do so well. I think it had like 15 players. Didn't do very well. Only like a 46% win percentage. The best one being 9-4, which isn't terrible.
9-4
but I
bad.
heard Bronzong Corviknight was like the bee's knees.
Now let's see. Did they play the Bronzong? No, they did not. They did not play the Fire Weak Bronzong. There's your problem. I'm just going to say it. That's your problem. Clearly, Victini, VMAX, and Centiskorch are the things that are going to beat you. Play the Bronzong that stops fire.
The problem with that, Sean, is that, you know, we look at these Firebox decks.
They have Cram.
Got the Reshiram Charizard that allows you to break through all of the abilities and stuff. You've got possibly a Mewtwo, Mew-GX. You've got Cramorant. So it's not a perfect strategy, but it could win you a lot of games. I see what you're saying. It could do you very well.
Because you're already playing the Mew, so the Cram is not going to snipe your bench if you play that right. So I do think that like forcing your opponent to use the Reshiram and
the
Charizard's
non-fire
GX,
attackers.
Or the non-fire attackers, like force them into those and committing energy to things that are not optimal in this matchup and be like, okay, cool. If you want to take out this 1/1 prizer, that's what you got to do.
If you throw off your opponent's strategy, they're more likely to make mistakes, especially in the beginning era of a new format. But Sean, there's a lot more battle styles to play. Really excited. If I were to recommend one thing, if you're like me and you can't get a lot of battle styles, play Dragapult. Yes, you're going to cheese a lot of the Urshifus because of weakness, but I think Dragapult overall is not actually that bad of a deck. I just think we got to play around with it a little more, and like it's cheap.
I would also Reco, because again, I played Eric from Rare Candy. I was in one of his videos, and I played Necrozma V. I don't think Necrozma V is like the deck you should play, but Gengar and Mimikyu is filthy against Urshifu. Rapid Strike, Single Strike, don't matter. So if you're going to play Dragapult, to your point, Jake, throw in one Gengar Mimikyu GX.
Try it out.
Just try it out.
Have some fun. It's also just a fun deck overall, putting the damage counters everywhere and things like that. But Sean, that is all for us today. Thank you so much for watching. If you're on YouTube, again, if you're listening on like Spotify, Google, whatever, I am putting these videos on my YouTube. It'll probably go up on either Tuesday nights or Wednesday mornings. It just depends, like, you know, how my schedule is looking like. But it's not always going to be this bright. But it's always sunny when I'm with Sean.
Oh,
It's always sunny in Philadelphia or whatever is gonna copyright DMCA us or whatever.
Oh boy,
Sean. But Sean, have a great rest of the day. Thank you so much for listening or watching. Remember, it's going up on YouTube. Atrocious Gameplay. You can find it over there. I'm gonna make a playlist of the Metapod episodes, so then you'll be able to watch. And yeah, thank you so much. Have a great rest of the day. Love you all. Keep playing. Keep playing.